Devastated? Confused? Heartbroken? So many times in life we get thrown for a curve and don't know how to react.
I can tell you the first time I had sex, how was my marriage going to survive? It's over. I remember standing in front of the judge with my 3-week-old baby, looking at my ex. I saw the look on his face, and it was complete rage.
Welcome to When Life Throws You a Curve and How to Make the Adjustment with your host, Katie Hamilton.
Hey everyone, welcome to When Life Throws You a Curve and How to Make the Adjustment. I'm Katie Hamilton. Thank you so much for joining me. Oh my goodness, today's going to be a little bit different. As most of you know, I've taken the last 2 weeks off. I had a bunch of stuff with my little ones, getting the end of the school year wrapped up, and some extracurricular activities for myself, having to do with court, which is always a blast. I kind of feel like that's been a never-ending topic, which I am very, very hopeful comes to an end quickly, because it's definitely worn me out. But over the last 2 weeks, it's been the most interesting time for me. I feel like as we are starting to come out of this, coronavirus situation and getting, kind of back to life, sort of normal. It's not quite normal. I feel like the Lord has just really shown me so many things. He's reminded me of stuff that He's told me in the past. He's reminded me of a lot of different seasons of my life and lessons that He's taught me and things He's told me, about my future and how to, use my gifts. And He's also, shared with me about this podcast and, kind of what's on His heart for it. So I want to share with you guys kind of what He's shown me these last 2 weeks and what He's reminded me of and kind of where I see this thing going. It's been a little bit of a reset for me personally. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that. I feel like there is a lot of shifting and changing, and I just have this feeling of expectancy in my spirit. I don't know if that sounds weird. It probably does, but I get these feelings sometimes before something happens, and sometimes it's a good feeling and sometimes it's not a good feeling. This is kind of, I don't really know what to expect, but I'm expecting something, and I feel like it's good. So, that's at least a little bit hopeful for all of us. I'd love to hear from you all on that. I do have to say real quick that I've gotten so many really awesome questions from you guys. Like, some of your questions, I could spend an entire podcast on just answering the one question. So I do want to take some time in these next few podcasts and, at least try to go through a couple of them at the end of each show, because they're deep and they're so layered, and I love hearing from y'all. So please keep sending those to me. Anyway, back to today. So over the last 2 weeks, God's just reminded me of different seasons in my life. And, this last 5 years for me personally has just been a season of endurance. And it's been a lot. It's been exhausting. But, I've continued to, press in and keep going. And I'm thankful for that. But I was thinking back to the season of baseball. And, the reason that I named this podcast, as you all know, When Life Throws You a Curve and How to Make the Adjustment, is dealing with challenges and like seasons of change and kind of getting through those unexpected situations that we maybe weren't anticipating. And it was really through those peaks and valleys, like leading into baseball and then during that season of my life. And then, of course, the last 5 years, where I've learned to just, have to figure it out with Jesus. And it's really come from like pressing in and listening, to His voice and hearing what He's saying to tell me what do I do? Like, what's my next step? How do I get through this? How do I move? What are you saying to me, Lord? And I remember, I think I've told y'all this story before, so I'll make it quick. before Josh started playing baseball, I got to a place of such desperation, like total desperation for God to heal him, that I said to him, Lord, if you will just heal him, I promise if I'm ever asked to speak, I will do it. Which for me was like the worst thing. You know, it was just a terrifying scenario, something I would never do. And I just kind of hoped that God would heal him and then I would never get asked. But of course I did get asked, and I remembered me, saying that promise to God, and I was like, okay, well, Katie, you're a woman of your word. You're not going to, break your promise. You're going to keep it. So as terrified as I was, I got up there, I spoke, God totally got me through it. I mean, it was exhilarating, exhausting, but he taught me so many things just through that one experience. And then, I did go on to speak many more times, even with my ex-husband throughout his career. But when I was in that baseball season of my life, that decade-long season, I knew very, very much that it had an expiration date. And I knew what a treasure it was. Like, I knew, like, deep in my spirit that it would have an expiration date. And I cherished it. I mean, I cherished it with every single fiber in my being. I knew it was a miracle. I knew it was a gift. I knew it wouldn't last forever. And I didn't want to take it for granted. I mean, everything I feel like the Lord told me to do during that season, it was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And there's a reason I'm saying this. I'll get to it here in a minute. But, it was like I didn't want the season of my life, of that life gift, to end and me go back and think, oh my gosh, I wish I'd gone to more games, or I wish I had traveled on more road trips or taken my kids to more stadiums. I mean, I soaked in every single second of every single minute. I mean, I'm telling you, there was not one at bat Josh had where I was not praying for him. And none of it ever got old. Every single catch, every single hit. I mean, the whole thing, like, I knew I was living in a gift, and I really did cherish it. And so sometimes I felt like maybe it wasn't being treated and cared for with the same tenacity that I had for it by, I'm just going to say it, by Josh. I didn't, sometimes I feel like he treated it recklessly or carelessly. And it was so hard for me to see that and not get, very, very angry at him. I mean, I really had to just stay in that place of like letting the Lord love me so I could love Josh through the Lord, because, if you value something, you treat it well and you care for it. So that's the perspective that I had the entire, and I know Josh has his own set of issues, and I'm not like trying to get down on him for that. I'm just telling you like my experience and how much I valued it. But I am glad that I went through everything I did before baseball, because I would not have had that perspective. I wouldn't have known what a gift it was, and I would not have been in a place of such submission to the Lord. Like, whatever you ask me to do, God, I'm going to do it, because I know, like, you've kept your promises. Like, I'm going to keep mine. I'm going to be obedient to you. So one of the things that he asked me to do during that time was, in 2010, in spring training, I felt him telling me that he wanted me to lead the Ranger Wives Bible study. And I was like, oh, no, that's not a good idea. Let's don't do that. I mean, the whole thing just terrified me, and I was not trying to do that. And I was, no, that did not sound good. And, I didn't say anything to anybody, of course. And I was just like trying to talk God out of it, like every step of the way. And I'm like, and we have a Bible study leader, so there's really no reason for me to do that. And I'm just, no, thank you, but no. So the season started, and we had our first Bible study. And I remember the next week, it was every Sunday home game, the Ranger Wives had a suite, and we would meet for lunch at a place at the ballpark before Bible study. And I remember one of the wives, and then it was really like all of the wives, looked at me, and it felt like an intervention. And it's how I felt. This is how I remember it. Like, they may remember it differently. This is how I remember it. It was like they all looked at me and they said, we want to change how Bible study's done. And I was like, oh, okay, well, like, what did you guys have in mind? They said, well, we really want you to lead it. I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. And then it was just like, God was like, yes, you do know. You do know. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I actually feel like God's been telling me this for a couple of months, but I've really been very resistant to it because I just don't really know what I could possibly have to bring to the table, and I just don't feel equipped. And it doesn't sound good, but I'll do it, And I was like, it was just an act of obedience. And I remember so we ended up doing Beth Moore's So Long in Security. And I had the book. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a Bible study. It was a book, but, we went through the book. And it wasn't like I didn't have some sort of guide to go on. Like, I mean, it wasn't like I had to just, study the Bible and come up with this material totally without anything. I had something to go on. But even still, it was terrifying to me. Clearly, I needed the So Long in Security study myself, and I know I did. But what that time did was, I mean, I would remember, preparing for that study every week, or every week we we're going to have one, and I just was like, God, you have to help me. Like, it was like total reliance on him. It was exactly how I felt before the first time I spoke, and before every single time I spoke. And, those things that he's asked me to do, and he might be asking you to do, that are just seem like so much out of your realm of like comfort in every way, shape, and form. But I'll tell you, he always showed up every time. And the wives, we prayed every single week that we met for the Rangers to go to the World Series. And as you know, they went in 2010. We did not pray for them to win, which in hindsight, I'm like, we should have prayed for them to win. So I led the Bible study the next year for about, I think it was half the year, because I was pregnant. I ended up, giving birth towards the end of the season. But in 2010, we did get our A's handed to us. I mean, like, we lost in 4 games, but it felt like we won. I mean, it was we knew it was an answer to prayer, and I had been praying that whole season for Josh to win the MVP, not necessarily because I wanted him to have that award, but that's what God put on my heart. So I prayed an hour every single morning that he would win the MVP. I mean, that whole season was just I feel like a supernatural thing, but I know that we would not have been able to experience that if those women, hadn't felt in their spirit like we need to have a change and come to me and said, like, we want you to lead it. Like, I can promise you I did very little leading. It was all God, but it got all of us together and kind of like in one accord and in agreement. And, we were praying for the same thing. We were praying for all of our husbands. We were praying for just like chemistry on the team, and God did so much. Like, you can go back and watch. I was actually somewhere the other day and they were playing. I walked in the room and I actually saw Josh, my ex-husband, on the television, and it was just him in his jersey. And it was the 2010 World Series, and it was kind of from the San Francisco Giants point of view, and they were talking about, them winning. And I was just flooded with all of these emotions of gratefulness and gratitude. And I know we lost. I mean, but it felt like we won. It was such a victorious, like, time and season for the families, I feel like. Now, the next year when we went back to the World Series, no, that one stung. That was a whole different lesson for another day. But it was still, I mean, such a great adventure. But these times when God asks us to step out and do things that we just feel so equipped, like motherhood for me, and even this podcast, and the book writing that he's having me do, because he had me in a place these last 2 weeks where he was like, what are the things that I've told you to do? And I'm like, well, you've told me to use my voice. You've told me to write. None of these, I don't like to do any of these things. And he's like, but he said, do you remember when you led that Bible study? And I said, yes. And he said, what did you do? I said, I had to press in and listen to you. I had to get, I couldn't make a move. I couldn't do a thing, anything, take a step without knowing that I'd heard from God and that I had his direction. So I knew how to pray. And then I could hear what he was saying, and then, and then I was able to do it. And obviously, that's that, divine collaboration that comes with him. But the same way I felt about not wanting to miss, that whole season in my life of baseball and missing out on any of it. I wanted to soak all of it in. I feel that way about my life and about the things that he's called me to and, destiny and all of that. And I feel like I'm at a point where he's calling me into a new season and a new level, with him. And I don't want to wake up when I'm 80 and think, oh man, I missed it. I knew he was calling me to do X, Y, and Z, but I didn't do it because I was, fearful, or I felt inadequate, or I was busy, or whatever. It has to be an overwhelming yes. I'm going to do it. I'm going to trust you, God. And wherever you lead, I'm going to go. And I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So with regard to this podcast, and that's kind of the whole thing with this, making the adjustment, there has to be room for the Holy Spirit to just move, and we have to be able to kind of go with the rhythm of God's heartbeat and go with the flow of the Spirit, because he is moving and he's speaking, and he's I feel like he's doing something new, and he wants to do something new and take us all to a deeper level of revelation with him, and he wants to really use us for his kingdom. And we all have to use our gifts. Wherever he's called you, wherever he's, called me, it's all going to look different, but it's all going to work. There's going to be a place for everybody. So, but we have to say yes, and we have to actually take bold faith and step out and do it. So anyway, with regard to the podcast, I can't tell you how it's going to look every week. Some weeks I may have guests, some weeks I may not have guests, but, God may only give me the word for, next week, or there might be a time where he says, you're not going to have a podcast next week. I need you to listen to me, because what I have is going to take me 2 weeks to tell you. Not really for him to tell me, but maybe for me to get it. Of course, my plan is to still have a podcast every week, and like I said, I really do want to answer some of y'all's questions, because the other day I got a question about enablement and people with struggling with addictions, and what was my thought process on enablement with people, helping the, people that are addicted with handling their finances, or being accountability partners, or, all manner of things with enablement. Just that subject alone, I could talk about for a solid hour. I won't, but I could. But anyway, aside from, really being able to answer, some of y'all's questions, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I have to tell you that I'm being very transparent and telling you that we're going to just kind of go on this journey together. And it's a little bit nerve-wracking. I'd much rather have a very clear game plan. And I feel like up until this point, I have had a pretty clear game plan. But over these last 2 weeks, God said, well, no, you can scrap that, because I want you to listen to me. And just like you did that Bible study, you had to press in and you had to hear what I was saying just so you could get up and do it. He was like, it's going to be like that. But you know me well enough, Katie. I'm not going to leave you up there by yourself. So, I take him at his word. And I'm very hopeful and very expectant. But you all are going to get to kind of walk this journey out with me and see what God does with it. So I hope that you will stick along with me for this ride. I really appreciate y'all being here, listening to me chat for, the last 30 minutes or so. And I hope that you will join me next week. Please send me your questions, and thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week. Come find me on social media on Instagram and Twitter at Katie Hamilton 32, on Facebook at Katie Hamilton and at When Life Throws You a Curve 32, and on YouTube at Katie Hamilton.